Good morning, friends. Welcome back to the channel. I'm the GM Philosopher, and today we're talking about how to create a D&D campaign from scratch using mostly homebrewed methods. This doesn't mean you can't incorporate some published stuff, but hey, if you are getting ready to start a D&D campaign and you're not sure exactly where you want to start, you're not quite sure what to do, well, guess what? This is the video for you because I'm going to walk you all the way through it. I'm going to take you all the way through all the main points that I cover when I create homebrew campaigns. You're not going to want to miss this. Let's dive right into it. So let's dive right into point number one. Start with an idea or theme, okay? Now, quick before we get too deep into this, I want to let you know that I have created this checklist as a PDF download. You can download it. Link is in the description. The link is literally called How to Create a D&D Campaign Checklist. It is free. You don't have to sign up for anything. All it is a PDF, very simple PDF checklist on my Google Drive. You can grab it, download it, print it out, use it, and you can either follow along with this video because I'm basically going to follow this outline and I'm going to use it as a reference guide, but I'm going to expand on it a little bit, or you can print it out and just use it yourself, whatever you want to do. But I'm making that available to you. So you can grab that for free, and you should grab that because at the very least, you'll get to follow along with that as you go through this video, because this is the checklist that I'm following as I create this video. Now let's talk about this. Step number one, start with an idea or a theme. So what does this mean exactly? Well, I like to start with the core concepts, and also I draw from sources for inspiration, okay, and basically flesh out the main idea. So for my last campaign, the campaign I'm running for my core group right now, the idea was I wanted to create a campaign where it was basically following a group of adventurers who were immigrants, refugees from a war-torn country. And so they were fleeing the country of Valara, which was under attack by the draconian monotheistic religion of Scalethar the Red, the Rite of the Crimson Scale. It was very much an oppressive regime of like domination and control, where they were going to basically launch this crusade to subjugate everyone who did not bend the knee to Scalethar. And these player characters began the game after the final battle of the invasion of Valara. Their forces were routed. They were forced to flee the country on a ship as refugees rather than stay there and be subjugated by Scalethar. And so I wanted to tell the story of basically refugees, immigrants, having to leave their home and then finding whatever future awaited them, whether it be adventure, whether it be success, whether it be business success, whether they were going to make a name for themselves as freedom fighters or resistance fighters, whatever it was. This was the idea that I started with. And so that was my theme. That was my idea. Of course, I was playing D&D, pretty straight D&D, 2014 rules. So we were playing high fantasy. And for inspiration for this, I really was drawing from like nautical type movies. Like the beginning of this campaign started with them on a ship. So it was very much like sad, dark, a little bit gritty. Like it was almost a little bit of, there were some horror moments. Like, I pulled from sources where I got those kind of vibes, and I pulled from music where I got those kind of vibes. And basically this just set the tone for me so that I could write out the material surrounding the beginning of the campaign. And that's really where I think going a level deeper with it is important. See, establishing the tone and mood is really important. Now, you can have your setting, have your theme, have your concept. This is great. But then you want to decide what tone you're going to set. Is it going to be dark? Is it going to be gritty? Is it going to be lighthearted, fun? Is it going to just be adventure and high fantasy? See, for me, in the beginnings, there was sort of like a hopelessness. There was hope, but it was going to be difficult. And there were going to be many obstacles between the party and their goals. Definitely between them and succeeding in this new, far away, strange land. But also, I wanted an air of gritty realism to this because they were on the ship. There were lots of injustices going on. They had to band together just to keep from being victimized by the opportunistic crew. And so this was a very kind of real life grittiness that I wanted to incorporate into the game. And even when they reached the port with customs, and then they had to be branded as immigrants with this little magic seal, and this country had fairly stringent immigration policies. And so they literally weren't allowed to carry weapons or use magic lest they be in danger of getting picked up by the local guards. And so they faced all of these obstacles. And I wanted to make this a very real thing. So we want to establish a tone and mood, right? And we want to consider player interests too. Now, I presented this idea to my players, and this is another important thing. You want to make sure your players are interested in the type of game you want to run. My players were super hyped about it. They were pumped. However, it is not always the case. I have pitched campaign ideas in the past where the player characters are like, I don't know, like that's a little different than what I would like to play. And so then we just go back to the drawing board, figure out something that the players would like to play. As a GM, the best campaigns you're going to run are those where you have strong collaboration with your players. So that's really important. By the way, do you struggle to come up with plot arcs on the fly? If so, I have the perfect tool for you. It is called My Ultimate Plot Randomizer. It is a free ebook. When you join my email list, you can download this for free. You'll get the link in your first email. It contains 4 D100 tables that will let you roll random plot arcs whenever you need them. Roll the hook, the conflict, and the conclusion, and even add wild and wacky stuff all right there. Download this, print it out, add it to your tool collection, and you will never go without another plot arc again. I give this away for free to help you create awesome plot arcs just like I do. I use this in almost every single session, and you are not going to want to miss out on this, so make sure you grab this. And that moves us on to step number 2, create the setting. So I want to start off with some general advice, and then as usual, we are going to go a level deeper. So general advice, you want to design the world, okay? And then you want to design a map. You want to identify some key map locations. This is the basic fleshing out of your world geographically and spatially, right? And the way I did this was I really envisioned that the majority of this campaign was going to take place in this one big coastal city on the coast of this new country they were fleeing to. And this big city was basically a magicarchy, basically a city run by the most powerful magic users. And that was the hierarchy. The more powerful you were with magic, the higher you could ascend into the hierarchy of the society of this basically large city state. But this large city state didn't just control itself, it also really controlled most of the region. With that being said, toward the north, it was more of a wild region. But I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to put a lot of energy into fleshing out this city state because I really foresee that the players will basically spend most, if not all, of the campaign here. Now, it turned out I was wrong. They stayed there until level 5, and then they stole a ship and they bounced, which I do not blame them for. They chose to take their destiny in a different direction. But what I did was I just spent a lot of time basically plotting out the different parts of the city, what the cultures were like in those parts of the city. I developed like one plot arc to get started with for each part of the city. I basically figured out how the government worked. I figured out what the local guards were like. All the stuff that I thought I would need. And I even ended up with a map of the city. I basically tried to give the players everything they needed to have a very immersive experience here. Now, let's take this a level deeper, okay? We want to talk about cultural and political dynamics, right? Fleshing out your world isn't just about where's the city, where's the ocean, where's the forest. It's also about what kind of politics, what's the culture like here. In my world, in this particular city, the culture was one of, if you are a magic user, you are above the citizens who are not magic users, right? Those people were living on the lowest dredges of society, whereas those who could use magic were kind of like risen to a higher level of society, right? And so there was this cultural kind of thing. Now, politically, it got really dark. Okay, there's a lot of people trying to get other people out of their ways, manipulation, political maneuvering, political sabotage. Right, this was a very common thing in the higher echelons of the order of the city, because once you get these magic users to a certain point in this particular city and in this culture, they were really incentivized to pull out all the stops to remove any potential rivals so that they could create the best situation possible. So fleshing out the cultural and political dynamics of your place is really important. Another thing is that the politics of this particular city in regards to the Draconian invasion. Okay, the Draconian forces under Scalethar the Red, the Right of the Crimson Scale. This city, as a general rule, was like, we are not about that. We are not about to let what happened to Velara happen to us. And so they had a very strict policy when it came to Dragonborns, okay? Because Dragonborns were basically Scalethar's people. He elevated the Dragonborns to being his supreme race and basically subjugated all the other races. In fact, we had a couple player characters whose backstories were that they were literally One was a human, one was an orc. They were enslaved by Skeletor and forced to bend the knee and to enter servitude. And then they both ended up escaping in various different ways and fleeing to another place. And so that is kind of like the political dynamic here was that if anyone played a Dragonborn, they were going to face intense religious and racial persecution in this city-state, which we might think to ourselves, well, that's not cool, because what if there's a Dragonborn who is not affiliated with Skeletor? It's like, well, we have to take into account the political and societal views of that location, and there are going to be injustices, right? And so this is just another part of it. We actually did have a player play a Dragonborn. This player ended up facing a really tough situation where they were basically just assumed to be a spy, like right from the get-go. And so this was very challenging for that player to try to role play. They had all of these things stacked up against them because of the political climate that the other players didn't have to deal with, because they were playing humans, elves, halflings, etc. Right? And there was no stigma toward those races. So it's very, very interesting. We want to go a level deeper. We want to take into account the politics, the history and lore, and the unique elements, introduce unique aspects. You may have new races, new religions, new magic systems to make your setting stand out. And I really encourage these things. And that brings us to point number 3, develop the main plot arc. Okay. Now, here's the general advice I have for this. Define the central conflict. Outline the main storyline that will drive the campaign forward. You also want to set clear goals, give players a clear objective or mission to pursue. Now, this doesn't mean they're going to pursue it. And this is something to talk to your players about when you start the campaign. You might say, hey, do you want more of a sandboxy thing, or do you want to follow like the storyline that I've set up? Now, in mine, my goal was very loose. It was like, this is the central conflict. You are refugees. Okay. Go survive, go make a new life for yourself. And so the nature of my campaign was quite sandboxy. I really only set goals on the onset. The goals moving forward were very fluid and flexible. With that being said, there were storylines that the player characters could have the option to pursue. For example, there was the Skeletor the Red plotline. Skeletor the Red was sending agents after the player characters, trying to hunt them down. They could have engaged in that plotline, or they could have ran. Now, the way it turned out happening was they ended up basically trying to just disappear, but they have plans to build up a resistance and to join the war against the Dragonborn. So that was like a plotline that they sort of saw and that they didn't have to pursue, but they did pursue it. And then there are clear goals that are very optional if they want to pursue them. But see, your story might have a more driven narrative than that, and in which case you'd want to set your goals and just communicate with your players about what the goals are. Now, as usual, we want to take this a level deeper. Let's talk about a little bit of a deeper way to develop a main plot arc. So plot twists and revelations. You can plan unexpected events that challenge players' assumptions and keep them engaged. Okay. This was actually really good. In my campaign, I had a warlock who basically said, hey, I want to have a patron, but I don't want to know who they are. I want to have begun my relationship with them under very mysterious circumstances. I think that the patron has hidden themselves from me for some reason. And I was like, got it. And it turned out there was this magical murder plot line going on in the city that they were trying to be refugees in. They were trying to make it there. And the local authorities actually recruited them to help investigate, partly because they realized that they were relatively formidable combat-wise and investigatively, but also because the murderer was only targeting refugees, they could use them as bait, so it kind of doubled up. So they were kind of given an opportunity to kind of earn citizenship through service to the government. But it turned out that ultimately the person behind the magical murders was the patron of the warlock of the group. And the warlock did not even know this. There was a whole mystery that had to be unraveled. So I love putting plot twists and revelations in there. If you can find a way to get different parts of your story to kind of blend together to make cool plot arcs, that's awesome. Also, don't keep in mind that you can have multiple story threads going, include side plots and subplots that intertwine with the main arc. I like to give each character their own arc and then just let that go where it goes. And then there's the main story arc. There can also be side quests, but if you get too many, they'll probably just forget about them. But anyway, another point here is that I think player agency is really important. You want to make sure not to create plot lines that will force the players to do things, but rather plot lines where the players are given the option to pursue certain things. And then whatever they pursue, that ends up being the story. Because don't forget, the story is actually what the player characters do, not like what happens to them. They're the main characters, and so the story follows them. The existential fourth wall camera is watching the characters because they are the stars of the show, the stars of the movie, the stars of the story. And so keep in mind that that's actually where the plot line goes. You're just creating the pixels and the options going on around them. Okay. Now that's going to lead us to tip number 4. Step number 4, create memorable NPCs and factions. Now, I could talk for about 27 hours about this because I love creating memorable NPCs, and I think it's one of the most important facets of the game. With that being said, let's talk about what NPCs should not be first. NPCs should not be primary characters in the story. They're a supporting cast. They are there to fill in the world around the main characters, who are the player characters. With that being said, you can use key NPCs to help drive the story, to assist player characters, and to engage them in roleplay. Also, this is one of the best ways to get your players emotionally connected to the game. So you can develop important NPCs like allies, mentors, villains, and rivals. You can also create factions and organizations, introduce groups that have significant influence in the world, and then figure out how those groups are aligned, figure out what their motivations are so that your NPCs can be really immersive and realistic. Also, you want to think about who your NPCs are loyal to, what their motivations are, right? Some NPCs are very simple. They want a bowl of soup. That's their goal. Some NPCs have dreams of becoming squires, or some would love to be able to be a knight. Maybe there's an NPC who wants to so badly to be a wizard, but they don't know anyone who can train them. But then they meet a member of your party and they're like, I will commit myself to this person. And they become like their sidekick. And then you have some NPCs who want to make a bunch of money, maybe selling secrets to the enemy. So they're spies, right? So you can develop a lot of cool key supporting characters by creating memorable NPCs. Now, let's just take this a level deeper, okay? NPC motivations and backstories. Just throwing an NPC into the mix is fun, especially if you do a great job with it, role play it fun, get the players interested in the NPC. However, there's no substitution for going back in time and figuring out why that NPC is so thusly motivated today. And this can really give you a lot of fuel to role play NPCs and make the immersion even better. I'm also a big fan of creating dynamic relationships. In my games, it's very, very common to have romantic relationships happen between PCs and NPCs, relationships happen between NPCs and NPCs. It's very common for NPCs to either really like or strongly dislike each other. They will develop their own unique relationships, inter-party dynamics that may be good or bad for the party. And then the player characters are forced to weigh the value of that NPC versus the drama or the trouble they cause due to the fact that they are, having issues with others or whatever the issues are. With that being said, it's important to understand that generally NPCs are just not as good as the player characters. They are not as smart. They are not as strong. They are not as powerful. They're not as influential. It is more difficult for them to achieve what they want. This is why they will tend to either not like the player characters, or why they will be drawn to them and want to serve them or help them. This is why they will seek out player character help very often. This is why they're going to look up to, maybe romanticize the player characters. Villains are a slightly different. If there's any NPC that's on par with your PCs, it would be the villain. But even then, your villain should never outshine the PCs. They should only threaten to. And then they should engage in some kind of wartime struggle or battle or conflict where the player characters have the means to defeat your villain if they work together and make relatively good choices and role play well. So anyway, there you go. I could talk a lot more about creating memorable NPCs, but for the sake of this video, this being a how to create a D&D campaign and then a checklist for this, I'm just saying that creating memorable NPCs and interacting with the player characters through those NPCs is really important to creating a really cool campaign. Now, let's move on and talk about the next point, which is design engaging encounters. So for me personally, I like to take this one session at a time. Basically, in session prep leading up to the next session, I will come up with a set of very light, kind of optional-ish, open-ended goals. And here's what I mean by that. there will be a list of 2 to 5 things that I want the party to see or experience. So one of them might be that, they have a ghost sighting, if that's kind of important to the plot line, or maybe they discover a clue, or maybe a certain NPC approaches them and gives them some certain type of information. So basically, these are goals that are going to be very open ended. And when I say optional, I mean I'm going to put them into the party's path. What the party chooses to do with them can be optional, but they're going to be things that I'm going to put in the party's path. So there are goals for the session. And then there's going to be one important encounter. It might be a combat, or it might be a deep role play moment. But this is how I build my sessions, and hence how I guide the creation of my engaging encounters, because the encounters with those, basically those goals, those light goals that I set, those are helping me to set up engagements for later. But then there's the actual conflict or the role play moment. A lot of times this is the combat of the session, if there's one. Sometimes there'll be more than one, but I usually plan out one and do the session prep for one. And this is going to be a combat that's probably going to happen to the player characters, or threaten to happen to them, regardless of what they do, unless they make radically different turns or changes in their trajectory. That doesn't mean that they're going to have to do the fighting. They might find a way to avoid that or whatever. It also does not necessarily mean that there has to be an end to the conflict that meets certain criteria. It's just me looking at my situation and saying, okay, this is the most likely thing that this is probably going to happen in the next session. Now, how do we make these encounters engaging? Okay, let's talk about general advice here. Variety of challenge. This is a spice of life. But we want to include combat, social interactions, puzzles, and exploration. These are all really important elements of encounters. And encounters do not need to mean combat. Encounters could mean they find an old tomb and they're going to explore it. An encounter could be they find a weird mushroom in the forest, trying to figure out what it is. An encounter could mean they find this friendly NPC along the road who tells them about a headless horseman and a weird lore legend that goes around here. Or it might mean a group of bandits shows up and demands that they turn over their gold, right? So an encounter could be many different things. So we want to include a variety of different types of challenges. If we do the same thing in every session, it's going to get a little boring. So we want to make it a little different, try to plan some different things. And during one session, put some discovery / exploration into it. They can explore the dungeon. In the second session, what you might want to say is, we did exploration last time. This time it's going to be combat. There are going to be zombie skeletons are going to attack. And then maybe in the third session, you open up the opportunity. They find a puzzle leading to a deeper level of the dungeon. They could choose to try to solve the puzzle, go down there, or they might say, we're done. We're getting out of here, whatever it is. But you put different types of encounters in front of the party to kind of vary the experience. And you might find that your party likes some types of things more than others. For example, I think that my core group gets they're not super into puzzles, not all of them. So I'll use puzzles kind of sparingly, but they love exploration and discovery. They love immersive role play with interesting NPCs and villains. So I'll put a lot more of those things in there. Now, you also want to balance the difficulty. Ensure encounters are appropriately challenging for your party's level. It is no fun for a party to walk in and to just get waylaid by a creature that there's no way they can kill. There can be a fun element to escaping this type of thing. But to be honest, this kind of verges on being just no fun, because what makes the game fun for player characters is being able to affect meaningful change within the storyline. So you want to keep that in mind when you design encounters. Speaking of meaningful, let's take this just a level deeper. Let's talk about meaningful consequences of encounters. You want to design encounters that have lasting impacts on the world and the story. You want to make it so that it is significant what your player characters do, so significant that it changes the course of the story. You want it to be very viscerally do this, and you want to let this happen, and you want to make it known to your players that they have a lot of power in shaping the story. In fact, they have ultimate power because they're the ones the story is following. You also want to add some environmental interaction. Okay, use the setting to add depth to encounters. For example, if this is a gloomy, gritty campaign, maybe it rains a lot. Okay, if this is a campaign that is high fantasy, maybe there are always fake creatures showing up, right? So it's just you want to take your setting into account And when you run your encounters, you want to add some environmental factors to it that really lend itself to your setting, to kind of add to that, to give it that sense of whatever it is you're trying to bring, the feeling, right? Now, you also want to encourage player creativity, encourage multiple solutions to challenges, rewarding creative thinking. Okay. Some GMs get a little disappointed if they are like, oh, there's a door and there's a special lock. But then the barbarian says, how many swings might it take for me to bring the door from its hinges? And then you think to yourself, I had this fun lock picking challenge all set up, but then the barbarian's just going to slam the door off its hinges. This is cool. Let players solve problems in the way that they want to. And when you design engaging encounters, but then you let players do creative thinking, and then you just be objective about whether or not it would work. This is actually very cool. This will earn you a lot of respect and will make your campaign feel so much more immersive and real. Hey, real quick, are you tired of rolling the same old dungeon loot using the same old methods time after time, game after game? Well, I have a solution for you. This is how I roll all of my dungeon loot now. It's a book I created called The Ultimate Dungeon Loot Randomizer. This book contains 10 massive D100 tables full of awesome dungeon loot. Roll on a table for mundane items, slightly magical dungeon items, mundane weapons and armor, magical weapons and armor, individual pieces of treasure, magic scrolls, potions and elixirs, cursed items, forgotten wonders and otherworldly relics, and even full chests of treasure and loot. This book is now available on my Blurb bookstore in 3 different versions. There's a hardcover option, a softcover option that's more affordable, and a super affordable digital ebook option. It's even system agnostic, meaning you can use it with any fantasy TTRPG system, and you can just adapt it to the rule set you're using. Link is in the description. Don't miss out. Grab it today. And that's going to bring us to part number 6, which is actually a little bit challenging in some cases: incorporating player backstories. Now, there are a lot of ways to incorporate player backstories into your campaign, but let's just talk about some general advice first. Integrate personal stories. Weave players' character backgrounds into the campaign narrative. A lot of times what I will do is I will ask my players to write me out a backstory. I'll supply them with the setting information. I'll ask them to write me out a backstory. Now, some of them will turn in pages and pages and pages. Some will turn in 1 paragraph. This is fine, because what I'm looking for is 1 or 2 things that I can see that will make me think, that is it. That is what's going to tie them to this. I can use that to make something very cool happen here. For example, in my Discord game that I'm running for my Discord group, there is one character who has a backstory where, even though she is a human, she was trained from a young age at a monk monastery that was very specifically built to service an order of elven monks. And the reason she's there is because she had an elven basically master, an elven sponsor, who said, hey, she is amazing. She deserves to come to the monastery. Many of the elves distrusted her, didn't like her, but she was a very staunch ally, supporter, loved elven culture. And so she was sort of like this outsider with a foot in the camp. She had to deal with all the distrust and earning the right to be there among the other elves. But this really worked really cool because the plotline of the story takes place in a very deep elven heritage type, rural village. And so interestingly, none of the player characters are elves. So when they went in, they all looked like outsiders, but she knew the elves intimately. And so she could sort of make efforts to try to get them to understand that this group was, not in here to be outsiders and change anything. They're here to help. And so integrating that backstory, that storyline part of it, was really cool for bringing it into the present. And then this brings in individual motivations. Align personal goals of your characters with the main plot to increase engagement. Try to work this out with the characters. A lot of times you're going to have conversations with your player characters about what are the motivations of your character, what do they care about the most? And then if you get an idea for how their backstory could fit in more with a little bit of adjusting, talk to your players about that. Try to work those backstory elements in, because let me tell you, the more that you can work those things in, and the more that you can kind of get a sense of personal connection between the players and what's going on in the game. And then you bring that up once per session. This will make the game way deeper for them. Now, speaking of deeper, let's take this one level deeper. Let's talk about character development arcs, okay? Plan moments for each character to shine and evolve in every single session, right? Incorporate their backstory, but also create new arcs. I like to do this, make sure that every single player character has one meaningful, important personal moment in every session to where something's happening and their character can role play that, right? This is character development. Introduce personal stakes, challenges, test players' beliefs and values, put moral quandaries in front of them that are not there to undo them or defeat them, but are there to give them an opportunity for deeper role play. This is very amazing. This is what player characters love to do when they love to role play. They love to role play deeper engagements. So putting more complex dilemmas in front of them to show how their character thinks about the world is very, very cool. And then inter-character relationships. We've already talked about this a little bit, but encourage connections and tensions between party members. If player characters act these out, this is really amazing. However, you don't even need them to do that. You can do this with NPCs. Maybe you have NPCs acting in ways that they're buddying up to one PC, and then they're kind of like giving the other one the cold shoulder. And this can create a little bit of fun drama and tension. Again, you're not trying to undo the PCs. It's not like there's going to be a fight and you have a strong NPC who's going to beat them or something. This is just role play. This is just incorporating player backstories and then how those players are motivated, and then putting current situations in front of them and saying, hey, how does your character want to react to this? This is what we're here for the story of this character, right? So let's tell it in all kinds of ways, not just in combat, but also in interpersonal conflicts, right? So that's going to lead us to point number 7, plan the first adventure of your campaign. All right, so you have your world state set up. The players have created characters. You have backstories figured out. You've got some NPC ideas. You've developed a sort of main plot arc or a story direction for the main campaign. But now, friends, it's time for the first adventure. You're about ready to show up and start playing. What are you going to do? Well, let me tell you this. A lot of times a campaign is broken up into many smaller chapters or adventures. In fact, the way I like to do this a lot of times is I like to think of them in 5-level arcs. What's going to happen from levels 1 to 5? What's going to happen from levels 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and 15 to 20? I break it up into 4 chapters, but you can do this in a lot of different ways. You could have many different chapters. You could have a chapter for each level. You could even have like 3-session story arcs, 5-session story arcs. Okay. You can arrange it however you want, but how do we come up with that first adventure? Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is we want to hook the players. Let's talk about some general advice here. Start with an engaging scenario that introduces the campaign's theme. Now, this does not have to go all the way to the big bad. The big bad might not even be in the scenes yet. The big plot arcs may not even be in the scenes. This might be a dungeon crawl, and the only thing that this serves to do is that this gets the characters' feet wet in the story, in the setting. Maybe they're going to go in here, raid the dungeon, defeat the zombies and the wizard, get the loot, and then they're going to go back to town. When they get back to town, they're dirty and gross, and they're met with an agent of the king who is going to give them a letter and say, I was looking for your adventuring group. A couple of you coming in with backstories served in the so-and-so guild, and I was looking for assistance on a delicate matter. The king cannot send his own people. He needs somebody secret, someone who is unknown. You and your compatriots have a reputation. In fact, just today I heard great news that you returned from a dungeon loaded down with treasure. Only a competent group could have done this, right? So, the first adventure may not even be about the main plot line. In fact, that adventure may only lead you to a place where you set up the beginnings of the main plot line. That's okay. But what do we want to do with the first adventure? We want to hook the players. We want to make it interesting, engaging, give the players a time to come out of their shell and start role-playing the characters. We also want to establish the beginnings of the setting, right? So we know the world setting, but where are the players starting the game? Provide enough details to immerse players in that world, focus on that local setting, really bring it to life, okay? Now, let's go one level deeper here. Immediate choices. Present meaningful decisions early on that affect the storyline. Throw moral dilemmas in there relatively quickly. Propose abstracted ideas that have to do with the plot line, but that don't have any direct significance right now, just to give the players the opportunity to role play with that. Okay. Foreshadowing. You can do this, include hints about future plot developments or threats. You can hint at the right of the Crimson Scale to the south. You've heard rumors of this, but is it real? Well, these are just rumors, right? But you can start foreshadowing a little bit. You can also set expectations. Use the first adventure, even the first session, to demonstrate the tone and style of the campaign. Set your gritty tone. Set your low magic tone. Set the tone of realism. Whatever it is, whatever tone you're trying to set. Maybe there are steampunkish elements, and you want to make sure the players see this. So they meet a gnome who has a steampunk wagon, who has a firearm, and he carries an electronic clockwork cat with him who's powered by lightning. You want to set the tone for what is going on early so the players get a sense for the flavor. Okay. So planning your first adventure really comes down to this. You plan the adventure itself, set a few goals, set the primary encounter, then leave plenty of room for role play. Let the characters explore this new world, this new setting. Let them get used to their characters. Remember to keep the spotlight on them and present meaningful choices, foreshadow, and set expectations. This is going to take you from session 0 through your first adventure with your players thinking, we want to continue. We want to see where this is going. We love this campaign already. We can't wait for next session. Now, with that being said, let's move on to point number 8. This is prepare supporting materials. All right, now, first off, what are supporting materials? Well, let's start with the general pieces of advice. Maps and handouts. Create visual aids to enhance immersion, okay? When I started my last campaign with my core group, I had basically a letter, which was actually a journal entry that one of the NPCs had written to herself. And I kind of read that to start the game. But I also had a whole Google Doc full of lore about the city that would be available to them. And so I made that available to them. I shared that with all of them. And so this is just an example of giving maps, handouts, NPC and monster stats can also fit into this, but this depends on your style. Having important stats readily available for smooth gameplay is important. Now, whether or not players need to have those stats is another thing. These don't necessarily need to take the form of handouts. These are more for the GM. So there's the stuff you're going to give your players to help them. And then there's the stuff that you're going to have ready for you, basically to support your encounters, support your combats, support your story. One thing you don't want to do is have to pause the game while you take, 10 minutes to find a stat block or to find that thing you made, right? And this is sort of comes down to preparation. Now, let's take this one level deeper. Let's go to talk about custom content, okay? Develop unique items, spells, or creatures specific to your campaign. If you want to homebrew a little bit deeper, you can create the stuff, but then it's really important that you prepare supporting materials for it. Just have it available. If you have a spellcaster with the group who has more homebrewed spells, hey, this is awesome. Just make sure you have it available so that you don't spend, 15, 20 minutes looking for something you created while your players are kind of waiting for the combat or whatever it is. I actually had an NPC wizard in my latest campaign who had a bunch of butterfly themed spells. And so I created these spells and I printed them out and I basically put them with her character sheet. And then every time she was playing, I just made sure to have that with me because those spells were actually very unique. And if I were to lose it, it would be kind of weird. I would have to go back and maybe she would have to default back to using the spells in the player's handbook, which would have been a little bit weird and off theme. It would have hurt immersion, right? Let's also talk about lore documents. All right. You can provide players with optional reading to deepen their understanding of the world. You could role play this as them going to the library or rolling a general investigation check about the local, situation. They could go talk to shopkeepers and whatnot. And this can be really cool as an optional thing. So maybe provide 1-page, 2-page handouts about lore, history, local society, what they noticed about local politics, etc. There's also session organization to think about. Okay, use tools or templates to keep notes organized for quick reference. A lot of times I will either write down NPC notes with their gear and stuff on lined paper or even in a Google Sheet. Now with a Google Sheet, you do have to have your computer up there. I think it's cumbersome on your phone, but this is a great way to keep notes and to organize things. I also have a clipboard that I have my physical papers in, and I use that to organize, and I try to organize it so that it's easy to reference. Let's be honest, running a good campaign, creating a campaign, running a D&D game in general is an organizational challenge, and then just making sure that you think about this in advance to support yourself and your players as you prepare to embark on it. This is way better than just showing up empty-handed with no organization. I'm not saying that you cannot wing a session arc on the fly. You might be able to do this, and it might be the best session you've ever run, but we will come into situations where if we're not careful, we can boom, hit a spot where a lack of preparation can cost us valuable game time, and it can slow the game down for the players. And so that's going to lead us to our next tip. Our next point in how to create a D&D campaign is number 9, be flexible and adaptable. All right, so being flexible and adaptable is really important for a couple different reasons. Let's cover the general advice here. Expect the unexpected. This is like a cardinal rule number 1 of playing TTRPGs in general. Be prepared for players to take the story in unplanned directions. Not only can you be pretty much assured that this is going to happen, but you can probably be pretty assured this is going to happen before you ever planned on it happening. And this leads us to the next tip here, which is improvise when necessary. Stay open to adjusting your plans based on player actions. Listen, if you are planning a campaign, if you've created a D&D campaign, if you've launched your first adventure, but your characters really go off course, you might be thinking to yourself, man, they hate my campaign, man, they hate my game. No, friend, listen, I have a couple simple questions to ask you. Number 1, are your player characters having fun? Are they getting into their characters, enjoying role playing, enjoying this new direction they've embarked on that maybe is different than the one you planned on? And is the game generally going in a positive direction? If so, congratulations, you have been very successful, and this is a sign they're enjoying the game. Now, it is a challenge to need to improvise, to have players deviate from your planned direction, but hey, this is okay. I'm just letting you know that when you're creating a campaign, being flexible and expecting the unexpected are par for the course. Now, let's take this just a little bit deeper. Player feedback. Okay, this is a big thing. Actively seek input to improve the campaign experience. It is a really good idea to collect player feedback after your sessions. You can do this between sessions. You can do this like in casual talking afterwards. You can be like, hey, did you have fun? What parts did you like the most? And just prompt them to kind of give you some clues as to what you could plan on incorporating more of in the future. You might find that your players have a certain love for a certain type of thing or role play or setting, or maybe they like more combat or less combat, whatever. And you may find that this is a really good way to go in the future to help make the game more fun for everyone. You also want to make a dynamic world. Allow the world to change in response to players' decisions. Being too held up on certain things can be really hard to sell. It can break immersion. So for example, let's say that you have a mid-level villain and you imagine that this villain is going to show up and do a parlay with the player characters, and he's going to give this, very menacing speech about how they are doomed. And then he's going to stalk away to plan his surprise ambush the next day. But then the players surprise him and they attack him and they push the fight till now. You may have thought to yourself, hold on, wait a minute. I did not plan on this. This ruins all my plans. Well, guess what? This is actually good. The players have actually jumped ahead doing what they want to do. And you can just think, okay, how would the villain handle this? And he handles it. If this gives him an advantage, awesome. If this gives him a disadvantage, awesome. Just play it as such. This is called having a dynamic world, letting the story follow the player character decisions and letting it roll as the punches ensue. Contingency plans are also good. Have backup scenarios or hooks to keep the story moving forward. Think to yourself, okay, I imagine it happening like this, but if it doesn't happen like this, is it going to ruin things? And if the answer is yes, then you may want to rethink. I always try to think of like location-based things. It's like I try to think, okay, I'm thinking about this thing happening at this location, but what if the players don't go there? This is called having multiple dimensions to cover. I like to keep my plot lines one-dimensional. So I'm going to make it flexible so that if the players don't go to that location, the encounter can still happen wherever they do go, if it's important for creating story that the characters can interact with. So keeping plot lines very simple and then creating contingency plans, thinking what could go unexpectedly, Probably will. How can I deal with it without hurting immersion and without hurting player agency? And that's going to lead us to really the final tip. When you're creating a D&D campaign, this is something to really keep in mind: scheduling and session planning. Now, let's talk about the general advice first. Consistent play times. Establish a regular schedule that works for all players. Now, this means how often you're going to play, how many hours you're going to play for, what works for your players. One thing that is a little bit kind of like difficult to navigate is length of playtime. So in my group, I find that some players they'll play 7 hours. Some players are kind of getting antsy 3.5 hours in. So this is a very diverse group. You want to think to yourself, okay, is it okay for players to leave early? Am I fine with that? Or do we all want to talk about this, figure out that we want to start and end together? And then if so, what's the minimum threshold for playtime? At my table, we pretty much have a standing understanding that people can leave whenever they need to, and that's okay. And we're just going to play basically as long as the majority of the party wants to play. We're going to shut it down when everyone's pretty much ready to be done playing. Some players may need to leave early. Now, in some groups, though, this can kind of hurt the fun. Some players may not want to miss out on the rest of it. So it's just important to talk about these things, discuss them, figure out what works best for your group. Oh, look at this. Peanut has decided to join us. This is Peanut, the champion kitty. Look at her. She's a beauty, but she's so grumpy. She's doing her thing right now. She just wants to be on my lap. Anyway, another thing to think about is session objectives. Outline goals for each session to maintain focus. Now, we talked about this already. However, I also want to keep in mind that when you're planning out your session, you should write down your session goals, write down the details of your encounter, be ready for that session as best as you can, because planning out, scheduling, having everything ready, doing as much of the work you can before the session starts as possible will let you get more playtime in, will let your players get more role play time in, as opposed to you having to deal with not having things ready or not having things planned, and then that can set back things. And if you lose 20 minutes, 40 minutes of game time due to a lack of preparation, this is no fun. You and your players deserve to make every bit of the use of the time you get together, because let's face it, in this busy world we live in, it's hard to get people all together. And so we want to make the most use of that time and be consistent, show up on time, well prepared. Now, let's take this a level deeper. Let's talk about pacing, okay? Balancing action, role play, and downtime is crucial to keep sessions engaging. And this is actually kind of tricky. Too much action can overwhelm players and take away from role play, whereas too much role play, not enough action, can leave players kind of like twiddling their thumbs, thinking, okay, what's next, GM? We're ready. Downtime is important to let players unwind, discuss things amongst each other, talk about the strategy, whereas too much of it will once again leave them twiddling their thumbs, thinking, okay, GM, what are we going to do? So just balancing that's where pacing comes in, pacing the schedule, or pacing the session, I mean. And what I do, simple rule of thumb here, I kind of try to wait until I'll do a thing, I'll have an encounter, the encounter will happen, and I try to give players ample time for them to do all the discussing they need, sharing items, looking at loot, whatever it is. I try to let them get completely done, and I kind of wait until the pauses between statements or role play get long enough, like 4 seconds of silence. Then I kind of think, okay, so are you guys ready to move on to the next thing? But if, just a couple seconds go by and someone else kind of says another thing, it's like, oh, we're not done yet. And that's okay. Want to leave room for that role play. I also want to talk about cliffhangers and resolutions. Okay. Plan session endings that leave players excited for more. This is really important. And I find this is key to making sessions even more exciting moving forward. Personally, I love to end every single session on a cliffhanger of some kind, with maybe a rare exception being when there should be full resolution, when they have just defeated the big bad or a mid-level villain, or they've just secured a big victory. Sometimes I'll let it just end, especially if it's like the end of an adventure arc, and I'll just let it end, and that will be the ending, and it'll be peaceful, and it'll come to a nice ending. But other than that, I generally try to put cliffhangers in. Okay, so cliffhangers are awesome. They make players excited for the next session. Now, let's talk about time management. Be mindful of session length and players' attention spans. Also, be mindful of what I said before. If players need to leave a little early, remember that it can be kind of stressful for players to leave early. What I like to do is have this conversation with players at session zero. I like to say, hey, friends, how much time do we realistically have to play? When should be a dedicated stopping point? And when you set that dedicated stopping point, try to honor it as the GM. Sometimes it's really easy for sessions to go over by an hour or even an hour and a half or 2 hours. But this can actually be quite stressful to players who are trying to be a team player, trying to be deeply involved in the game. They may not have the time. They may have to work the next morning. They may have kids to take care of at home. They may have work responsibilities, whatever. So honoring your agreed upon times from the GM perspective is kind of an art form, and it's really important to maybe making the game less stressful for your players. With that being said, I want to leave you with one final word of encouragement. Every GM out there, you and everyone else who's watching this, everyone else who's even not watching this, are capable of creating a D&D campaign that your players will love. I don't care if you have 1 player, 2 players, 12 players, 22 players, you can create a D&D campaign that is amazing and fun. And guess what? Every time you play a session, you're probably going to get a little better. If you're new to GMing, do not sweat it. Don't worry about it. Just get started. Do your best. And guess what? You're going to be amazed at how if you follow the basic pieces of advice I've laid out in this video, it's going to help you create a campaign that your players are going to love, that there's going to be very memorable for them. And guess what? You do not have to come even close to doing it perfectly. If you just try your best, you focus on the players, let them drive the narrative, and you show up well prepared, you are going to have a fun game and you're going to really enjoy it, and your players are really going to enjoy it. So I just want to encourage you to make the best of it. Don't be worried about failing. Just roll with the punches and keep on going, and you're going to be an amazing GM. With that being said, that is all I have to say on this topic. Thank you so much for coming back to watch another video, GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm here every single day creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D. So I will see you awesome people on the next one.